Way back in the distant past, that being the year 2024, I set out on a journey to kitbash every plastic sprue for bolt action. With 15 conversions already under my belt, I have been waiting for Warlord Games to release more plastic so that I can continue this experiment. However, it turns out that Warlord is not the only manufacturer of 28mm plastic miniatures for World War II. So, join me as we leave the company that created our favorite wargame behind in search of new kit-bashing horizons. I have been waiting very patiently for new Warlord plastics. Both of my Kitbash Every Sprue videos thus far have featured 7 or 8 kits each, but at the time of recording this video, there are only 4 available from Warlord that I have not yet converted. We know the roadmap for Bolt Action 3rd Edition has a new plastic kit being released once per quarter, which means I can continue to throw together new miniatures from Warlord offerings sometime in 2026. With an incessant need to kitbash, however, I just cannot wait that long. Enter Wargames Atlantic. Wargames Atlantic came onto the World War II scene pretty recently, but in a short time they have released 7 28mm plastic kits that are perfect for bolt action. I have not had much experience with these miniatures, so I figured there was no better way to familiarize myself with them than by cutting them up and repurposing them. I am going to be following the same rules as my previous videos, just with a Wargames Atlantic spin. 1. I will need to use the body from the sprue as the basis for each conversion. 2. At least one part must come from another sprue per conversion. 3. Outside of green stuff, plasticard, and other scratch building materials, all parts will come from Wargames Atlantic. 4. I will do my best to create new ideas or rarely seen conversions. 5. I'll keep it all historical, so no weird war or what ifs. Now that we're on the same page, let's get started. The German Sentries kit has 2 unique features. First, it has dogs. We'll come back to these pups later in this video. Second, the model with the greatcoat caught my eye, as it is the only one from the manufacturer wearing such a coat. It reminded me of the metal models available for the Polish motorized division, and thus I had my subject. I began my work by removing the buttons on the left side of the jacket with my knife. This makes the coat look a little off-centered, but the 2 rows of buttons just scream German to me. I then added some rifle pouches and a bread bag, both which I found on the Panzer Lehr sprue. Wargames Atlantic does not have a sprue with a German gas mask canister on it, so I had to borrow one from a Warlord sprue. Outside of green stuff, plasticard, and other scratch building materials, all parts will come from Wargames Atlantic. To attach this gear to the model, I wanted to recreate the overlapping straps found on the metal models. To do this, I cut thin strips from green stuff that had already cured and superglued it onto the model. For some reason, green stuff reacts to superglue very quickly, so I go little by little, gluing and pressing the strip into place so that I achieve the tightest fit possible. Once the right side was complete, I repeated the process on the left. For the head, it appears that the 10th Motorized Division was equipped with old patterned Stahlhelms, possibly using leftover stock from the First World War. Wargames Atlantic has a Great War German infantry set with such heads included, and those would be perfect, but I didn't want to purchase a sprue just for a single head. To recreate the helmet manually, I drilled a tiny hole on each side of the helmet with my hobby knife. Into this hole, I glued a small rod of 1mm plastic styrene rod. Once the plastic cement had cured, I trimmed down the rods to the appropriate size, and the helmet was complete. Finally, The Polish are one of the very few nations that can take a BAR in their squads, and the BEF sprue just happens to come with one. This was glued into place, and the model was complete. One nice thing about hobbying for the Second World War is that uniforms and equipment can be pretty easily generalized to fill a number of roles. My previous kitbash with an Italian body was used to represent an Axis minor power, and for this one I decided to go for a minor allied build. Greek soldiers in the Second World War had a pretty similar uniform and kit to their Italian foes, and since Greeks cannot be found in plastic, they made for a great subject. While painting is going to do a lot of the work for distinguishing this guy as Greek, I wanted to solidify that distinction by creating a bedroll from a sausage of green stuff. I applied the putty to the model, then shaped it to look a bit more natural. I overlapped the ends on the model's waist, then added a ball of green stuff to represent the tied off ends. Now, what gave me the initial idea to model a Greek soldier is a mistake on Wargames Atlantic's part. The helmets on the Italian sprue are very weird, and in my opinion, are not a very good representation of the Italian M43 helmet. That being said, they seem to resemble the Greek helmet very well. The only modification needed is to trim away the 2 bolts on the side of the helmet. To further differentiate this build from its Italian origins, I learned that the Greek army was still using the very distinctive this machine gun from the First World War. The French infantry sprue includes one, so I stole it and glued it into place. With that dried, this Greek is ready to defend his homeland from an incompetent Italian invasion. Hey, let's talk more about Italians. There are not too many things that can be done to the British bodies, short of completely overhauling the miniature to represent something that's not in service to Her Majesty. So I decided to look at other factions that use British uniform and gear, and lo and behold, co-belligerent Italy came to the fore. These Italian forces fought on the side of the Allies after the official surrender of Italy in 1943, and sure enough, they used Allied equipment where possible. So my first move was to satisfy the rules that I always follow to the letter by gluing an Italian SMG onto the body. This also helps communicate that this Italian is in fact an Italian. Next, I grabbed a British head with a bare metal Brodie helmet and carved away the right side of the brim. The reason being, I want to attach some bersaglieri feathers that can be sourced from the Italian kit, and this trim allowed the feathers to fit better against the helmet. Once everything was solid, I filled in some gaps with green stuff, and I had an Allied soldier with fancy headwear ready for painting. Like its counterpart from Warlord Games, all of the bodies in the French kit feature long jackets. Well, all but one. This officer's fancy boots sets him apart from the rest of the minis on the sprue, and they also look to me like they could pretty easily work as cavalry boots. Paired with the Adrian helmets found in the kit, this made me think specifically of Romanian cavalry. I wanted to turn this body into a cavalryman that had dismounted, so my first step in accomplishing this was to trim away the laces of the boots with my hobby knife. To clean up the areas I had shaved away, I applied a small amount of plastic cement, which softens the plastic and helps remove any tiny shavings. From here, I equipped the model with a carbine from the Italian sprue, followed by a bread bag and a saber, both of which are found on the French kit. The final piece to add was a head, and I wanted to do my best to replicate the unique helmet worn by Romanian soldiers. The French Adrian helmets in the kit have a decently close profile, so I grabbed one of those and began shaving away the crest on the front. and the ridge that extends across the top of the helmet. Once these details were removed, I added a small blob of green stuff to the front and began working it into the brim, creating a gentle slope into the rest of the helmet. I mixed my putty about 3 parts yellow to 1 part blue, which created a softer mixture, which is easier to blend into the existing plastic. I then repeated this process on the back of the head. Once the putty cured, I was left with a pretty decent representation of a Romanian helmet, and in turn, one Romanian cavalryman was complete. Panzer layer models sport a distinctive short tunic, and it just so happens that I recently received a comment asking how to build Italian Black Brigade models from plastics. And you thought we were done with Italians in this video. While Warlord doesn't really have a suitable plastic sprue for this aim, the Panzer layer models from Wargames Atlantic are a pretty decent base for the paramilitary group. To begin, I sculpted a breast pocket from green stuff to make the tunic a little closer to something a civilian might own. Following this, I wanted to cover up the gaiters on the boots, as they are a pretty obvious giveaway to the German roots of the model. I used my tried and true method of extending the pant legs. First, by removing the bunched up plastic on the cuffs of the pants with my hobby knife. Then applying a layer of green stuff over top. I always try my best to blend the green stuff into the plastic and the existing folds in the pants. And once that was ready, I created a few of my own folds with a rubber sculpting tool. To finish off the model, I added a Beretta SMG and a head with a field cap from the Italian sprue, finally closing out the Italian portion of this video. Wargames Atlantic's first World War II plastic kit is one of their best, both because it fills a niche role that can't be found elsewhere in plastic, and because it has a lot of character and options. While this kit can be used to represent partisans from all over the conflict, I thought of a military organization that hasn't been seen in plastic, the German Volkssturm. This sad militia was made up of men aged 16 to 60, and most did not receive full military kit, which made the partisan sprue the perfect place to start for them. I began my conversion by taking a Panzerfaust arm and a pistol-wielding arm from the Panzer layer sprue and combining them. I cut away both arms at the elbow, fastening the Panzerfaust to the upper section of the pistol arm, which would give the model a non-firing pose when I attached it to the body. I also made sure to cut away the disengaged safety and reattach it in the engaged position, so this poor fellow didn't blow himself up. While he is a poor fellow, he did manage to score a Stahlhelm, which came from the German sentry's kit. I then glued on a pointing left arm found on the partisan sprue. Since the Panzerfaust is a one-shot weapon, I decided to glue a German Kar 98 rifle onto the model's back, and then I attached a green stuff strap following the method I demonstrated earlier in the video. To really make the Mini stand out as Volkssturm, I decided to recreate the armband worn by the militia with a thin sausage of green stuff, which I wrapped around the left arm before shaping it with my sculpting tool. This simple conversion is complete and ready for painting. Once again, we come to a very British sprue with a very British uniform. Rather than turn it into something it's not, I decided to convert it to something I've not yet seen in 28mm. The SES uniform is very close to the one worn by British Airborne, and I am not aware of any 28mm paratroopers that are hanging by their deployed parachute, so I thought I would try my hand at creating one. I started with this running pose because the legs looked like they could be dangling from below the parachute. I glued on 2 arms I found that looked like they could be reaching towards the straps of the parachute harness. The hands weren't too convincing, however, so I removed them and found suitable replacements. I wasn't super interested in creating a hyper-realistic British parachute harness, but I did glue this gas mask bag from the BEF sprue onto the model's chest to imply the existence of such a harness. The SAS sprue has a correct helmeted head, which I promptly attached to the neck joint. Now, I spent 40 days and 40 nights trying to figure out how I wanted to recreate the parachute, and to be honest, I just couldn't come up with anything that would be practical. Not to mention, it would have to be huge, so I settled. The disappointment emanating from my viewers like you notwithstanding, I drilled a hole into each of the shoulder straps on the model. Into these holes I superglued 2 matching lengths of wire, which would be representative of the parachute rigging. Once dry, I superglued a green stuff control strap into each hand and trimmed away the excess. So, that left me with a paratrooper gliding down on his parachute. However, it seemed like the model was missing something. Perhaps what this paratrooper needed is a dog? I chanced upon this photo while googling British commandos with canine friends, and I could not stop laughing at how ridiculous it looked. Turns out, there were some dogs that jumped into Normandy with British paratroopers. By the time of June 6, 1944, the dogs were given their own parachutes. However, the photo I found made it look like the dog was perhaps connected to the paratrooper by a rope. So, where can we find a dog? Remember the German sentry kit from before? The German Shepherds look pretty close to the breed of the dog that jumped into Normandy, so all my problems were solved. I started my canine conversion with the standing dog, clipping away the puddle base and trimming away any excess plastic on the feet. Once I glued the 2 halves together, I clipped away the center of the pup, leaving just a little bit of plastic remaining connected on his belly. This allowed me to slump the dog over a bit to make it look like he was hanging from his harness. I also removed much of the plastic around the shoulders so that I could position the head in a similarly slumped position. My final destructive move was to cut away the tail, which will be replaced later. I needed to attach the dog to the paratrooper, so I glued a length of wire into the cavity of the dog's body. Once dry, I began to fill in the empty spaces with green stuff. I got the putty shape to my liking, then used the point of my sculpting tool to resculpt the missing fur. I let the green stuff harden overnight before moving on to the harness. The harness was created by rolling a green stuffed sausage around the pup, then shaping it. To secure the harness to the doggo, I made a couple straps with smaller rolls of putty. Then I could glue the top of the connecting wire into the boot of the paratrooper. I wanted to add a miniature rope between man and man's best friend, so I decided to use this length of razor wire from Army Painter. Once it's painted in khaki colors, the razor wire has a nice and interesting texture. This was super glued around the waist of the paratrooper, down to his boot, and finally to the dog's harness. And with that, perhaps the most ridiculous kitbash I've ever done yet was complete. With the models built, all that was left to do was paint them up, which left me with this. So there you have it, each Wargames Atlantic sprue for World War II, kitbashed. Most of these conversions are not too difficult to pull off, and could make fine candidates for building squads or entire armies. I'd say the Greek kitbash would be the best option for a full army, as the Wargames Atlantic Italian helmets are fortunately, or unfortunately depending on your goals, perfectly suited for creating Greeks, with no real green stuff work required to pull it off. My second choice would be the Volkssturm conversion, as these guys are cheap in bolt action, so creating a large number of them in plastic will be easy on your hobby and on your wallet. Wargames Atlantic did not sponsor this video, and I have plenty of opinions on their sprues. In fact, I have lots of thoughts on all the infantry kits manufactured in plastic for World War II. And it just so happens that my next video will be comparing and contrasting them, so I'll save my criticism and praises for that one. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. This tells both YouTube and myself that these videos are worth making. We'll see you next time.